Hi, this is Jamie Escalante with Literal Style, and this is the first segment in the series for the month of February, titled Literature and Pornography Parallels. I did want to state just quickly that the goal of this series is not necessarily to persuade you or indoctrinate you with regards to what I believe about the topics I'm looking at. Instead, I am striving to simply present information about these topics, literature and pornography, that have to do with what I'm interested in discussing as it relates to current society and culture, and encourage and empower you to ultimately draw your own conclusions and think for yourself regarding these issues and topics. So for the first part in this series, I'm looking at the concept of a woman's place, and the work of literature I'm going to be addressing is A Room of One's Own, and the work of pornography is Woman in a Box. So we'll talk about both of these and see where connections are and kind of how they each relate to the concept of a woman's place, quote unquote. So A Room of One's Own was written as a lecture that Virginia Woolf delivered to two women's colleges at Cambridge University in 1928. It was first published the following year, though, in 1929. The topic that she was given to deliver her lecture on was women and fiction. And she begins her essay in describing a personal experience that she had at a college or a male university where she was barred from the library. Because of her being a female, she wasn't allowed in. And so she uses this to introduce lack of female education and how that impacts them, or us, I'm a female, professionally, artistically, etc. And to do this, she responds to various male minds of her time and throughout history. One specifically stated that women could not write the plays of Shakespeare, implying that solely because we're women, there's something inferior, inherently inferior within us, thus we could not write them. So she comments on a woman's place in Shakespeare's time, discusses why women would not have been able to, and compares other female writers, of which there are a few, of that time period who, instead of writing freely, write of the struggles that women were encountering, and she kind of goes into that. So I wanted to actually go to the actual text now because it's just easier to look at it. So this is A Room of One's Own. It's in PDF form. You can locate it and read it online if you'd like to. I'm sure you'd love it. So here she's responding to this sentiment that women cannot write the plays of Shakespeare. I'm kind of pointing to that here. She talks about Shakespeare and what his life was like. So she writes, "He was, it is well known, a wild boy who poached rabbits, perhaps shot a deer, and had rather sooner than he should have done to marry a woman in the neighborhood, who bore him a child rather quicker than was right. That escapade sent him to seek his fortune in London. He had, it seemed, a taste for the theatre. He began by holding horses at the stage door. Very soon he got work in the theater, became a successful actor, and lived at the hub of the universe, meeting everybody, knowing everybody, practicing his art on the boards, exercising his wits in the streets, and even getting access to the palace of the Queen. Meanwhile, his extraordinarily gifted sister, let us suppose, remained at home. She was as adventurous, as imaginative, as agog to see the world as he was, but she was not sent to school. She had no chance of learning grammar and logic, let alone of reading Horace and Virgil. She picked up a book now and then, one of her brothers perhaps, and read a few pages, but then her parents came in and told her to mend the stockings or mind the stew, and not moon about with books and papers. They would have spoken sharply but kindly, for they were substantial people who knew the conditions of life for women, and loved their daughter indeed. More likely than not, she was the apple of her father's eye. Perhaps she scribbled some pages up in a neighboring wool stapler. Apple laughed on the sly, but was careful to hide them or set fire to them. Soon, however, before she was out of her teens, she was to be betrothed to the son of a neighboring wool stapler. She cried out that marriage was hateful to her, and for that she was severely beaten by her father. Then he ceased to scold her. He begged her not to hurt him, not to shame him in this matter of her marriage. He would give her a chain of beads or fine petticoat, he said, and there were tears in his eyes. How could she disobey him? How could she break his heart? The force of her own gift alone drove her to it. She made up a small parcel of her belongings, let herself down by a rope one summer's night, and took the road to London. She was not 17. The birds that sang in the hedge were not more musical than she was. She had the quickest fancy, a gift like her brother's for the tune of words. Like him, she had a taste for the theater. She stood at the stage door. She wanted to act, she said. Men laughed in her face. The manager, a fat, loose-lipped man, guffawed. He bellowed something about poodles dancing and women acting. No woman, he said, could possibly be an actress. He hinted you can imagine what. As she could get no training in her craft. Could she even seek her dinner in a tavern or roam the streets at midnight? Yet her genius was for fiction and lusted to feed abundantly upon the lives of men and women and the study of their ways. At last, for she was very young, oddly like Shakespeare the poet in her face, with the same gray eyes and rounded brows. At last, Nick Green, the actor-manager, took pity on her. She found herself with child by that gentleman, and so who shall measure the heat and violence of the poet's heart when caught entangled in a woman's body, killed herself one winter's night, and lies buried at some crossroads where the omnibuses now stop outside the Elephant and Castle. So what Virginia Woolf does is compare the type of life a male in Shakespeare's age would have had and the type of life a female in Shakespeare's age would have had, and demonstrates that it is not a lack of intelligence or genius, but instead opportunity that would prevent women from writing the works of Shakespeare. She quotes that it said of Shakespeare that he wrote with a mind that had consumed all impediments and become incandescent. And she references a woman, a Lady Winchelsea, that was born in 1661, who took to writing poetry. But the poetry that she wrote, it is stated that she was noble both by birth and marriage. So she was childless, so she had opportunity to write poetry. But what Virginia Woolf points out is that one has only to open her poetry to find her bursting out in indignation against the position of women. So she writes how we are fallen by mistaken rules. She mentions education. She talks about the resistance that a woman encountered during her time period when they did attempt to make something of themselves. And Virginia Woolf comments saying clearly her mind, she's referring to Lady Winchelsea, has by no means consumed all impediments and become incandescent. On the contrary, it is harassed and distracted with hates and grievances. The human race is split up for her into two parties. Men are the imposing faction. Men are hated and feared because they have the power to bar her way to what she wants to do, which is to write. And then here, Lady Winchelsea laments what it is like for a female writer at her time, and the various difficulties that she faces. And just on a personal note, this hit home for me, especially after my decision just to do what I'm doing now. I kind of faced a really harsh reality that what I wanted to accomplish and what I wanted to do, it didn't seem as though I would be able to, because there were too many different obstacles that I continued to face. There was too much just jealousy, envy, fighting that was around me that I wasn't able just to live the life that I wanted to. And instead, this specific issue of women's inequality and injustice came to the forefront, and I knew that it needed to be addressed in my personal life in order to actually accomplish what I want to. So reading this was it just resonated very much with me. Virginia Woolf comments on a couple of other quotes that she's facing. Again, this was written in 1928, A Room of One's Own, so she has some quotes from that same year. So here's some quotes on women. She has a medical physical purpose, and that is a dangerous obsession, especially with a woman. For women rarely possess men's healthy love of rhetoric. It is a strange lack in the sex, which is in other things more primitive and more materialistic. It's interesting, especially since I want to go into law. I do have a love for rhetoric. Second, if, like the reporter, you believe that female novelists should only aspire to excellence by courageously acknowledging the limitations of their sex, Jane Austen has demonstrated how gracefully this gesture can be accomplished. So, in order to be successful as a female novelist, we should only admit our own limitations as females. I guess is basically what that individual is saying. Virginia Woolf closes her lecture geniusly by giving women a brief history lesson. She talks, I believe, sarcastically and addresses the women of her time. She's speaking at a female college. And I'm going to look right here that there's so much goodness in these essays. It's unreal. But so she's closing and she's talking to the women, and she says, young women, I would say, and please attend, for the peroration is beginning. You are, in my opinion, disgracefully ignorant. You have never made a discovery of any importance. You have never shaken an empire or led an army into the battle. The plays of Shakespeare are not by you, and you have never introduced a barbarous race to the blessings of civilization. What is your excuse? She says. She talks about how up until that point, women have been wives, mothers, lovers, and continues on as saying that she concedes that they may have been busy, and again, this is sarcastically, I believe. She says, but at the same time, may I remind you that there have been at least 2 colleges for women in existence in England since 1866. After the year 1880, a married woman was allowed by law to possess her own property, and that in 1919, which is a whole 9 years ago, she was given a vote. May I also remind you that most of the professions have been open to you for close on 10 years now. When you reflect upon these immense privileges and the length of time during which they have been enjoyed, and the fact that there must be at this moment some 2,000 women capable of earning over 500 a year in one way or another, you will agree that the excuse of lack of opportunity, training, encouragement, leisure, and money no longer holds good. I think what she's showing is that women have not had the same opportunities that men have had, and so to somehow compare what we've accomplished with what men have accomplished and state that female lack of military prowess or economic achievement or success or political power, creative genius is not up to par with men, and consequently women are inferior, not as smart, not as capable, is actually really ridiculous. She states that a woman must have a room of her own space, and economic security. To accomplish that which is expected of her, if she's to be compared to a man. So that's Room of One's Own. Next, we'll look at A Woman in a Box.